So we know we live in a world controlled by algorithms, but have you ever stopped to think what effect this is having on youth in general and on youth culture? Well, we have. We work for a youth publication called Vice. We're a global multi-platform publisher, and we've started to notice through our youth research a few drawbacks that life in the digital world is starting to have for young people. So I'm Steph.
I'm Hannah.
And this is a little hype reel about Vice.
Vice magazine, which started in Montreal in 1994, it's become a global empire. You got Vice.com, international network of digital channels, TV production studio, a record label, an in-house creative services agency. Describe the Vice brand. What is it?
Vice is the voice of a generation. The world's first truly global, multi-platform youth media company. Vice delivers hours of original video content every day, covering the news, culture, and entertainment that define the world we live in.
Everyone was investing platform, money into platform, but no one was saying, well, what are we going to fill that pipe with?
I know everything about poo. Absolutely everything.
Cool, so hope
Hyped
you're all
up.
sufficiently hyped after our hype reel. So that was a good selection of like our local and international content, gives you an idea of what we do. So every year, our Australian and global network of creators produce hundreds of videos and thousands of articles that produce millions of views across millions of followers worldwide. But we don't only make content, we also conduct a lot of youth research as well. It's a really integral part of what we do. So we exist in this really unique space where not only are we a cultural publisher and we have a lot of creatives and insane minds churning away and developing content based on what's going on in culture, we also take the numbers very seriously. We conduct a lot of research, we sit on a lot of data, and so unlike your usual research agency, we kind of sit in this nice little Venn diagram of culture and data. So this is sort of informing the presentation that we're going to do for you today. So for the purposes of this, we talked to around 3,700 16 to 38-year-olds from across Australia and across all demographics. The way we did that was through our census. So we run this every couple of years, hundreds of questions to thousands of people, both from Vice and the general population. We also use Vice Insights, which is a survey tool that we run out to all our readers, just getting like open-ended, taking the temperature of how people are feeling on certain topics in pretty much real time. We use immersions, I should say, as well, talking to young people and getting their feedback about how they're feeling. And this is in combination with all of our digital data from socials, from both globally and locally, Google Analytics, all that sort of thing. So that's just sort of how we got here today. Throughout the presentation, we're going to be talking a lot about the buzzword of the century, millennials. So when we use millennial pink in any graphs, just look out for that one. Anyone 23 to 38 is classed as a millennial by the traditional definition. Gen Z, skewing a little bit younger, 16 to 22, represented by yellow in any of the graphs we show you today. The official definition is ages 6 to 22, but we're not allowed to get data from 6-year-olds just yet. So the future is nigh. So throughout the course of putting this together, we uncovered a couple of big things, and they're trends that we think are really shaping the way that youth culture is and the life that we live online, and that's a couple that we want to share with you today. So the first is that most young people are seemingly anxious as fuck, which I'm sure that a lot of us can relate to. And the second is that everything in culture is starting to sort of go on this path where it's starting to look a little bit the same. And they're both pretty huge, big, bold statements.
They are.
But that is something that we're going to try and unpack for you.
do a little tag team of this.
You
Wonderful.
sure can.
So we believe that we're in a moment of consensus, and what do we mean by that? So despite there being more choice than ever before, paired with a really strong desire to be unique individuals, our state of mind, our taste, and beliefs and opinions are all starting to look really quite similar. Why though? Excellent question. So 34% of 16 to 38-year-olds say that they're online on social media more than last year, and then kind of the general consensus is that Gen Z are engaging with up to 10 hours of content daily, which is a lot. So what we're saying is young people spend a lot of time on channels largely controlled by algorithms, and algorithms affect the way that we see the world. So to date, we've seen them used to sway elections, to create echo chambers that reinforce our own opinions and beliefs. They dictate what brands we buy, what content we watch, what fashion we're wearing, what music we listen to, and even who we date. And along with potentially destroying democracy, they're also having a pretty big impact on the state of youth culture and the state of our minds.
So let's talk a little bit more about what we mean by that. So before we launched into our big round of research that we do every couple of years, we used our surveying tool, Vice Insights, to sort of open the floor and just take the temperature of how everyone in our network was feeling. So between 16 and 38, what's the vibe? And we found some pretty worrying statistics, that around 60% of people at the time that they took this survey, this is across several hundred people, were feeling anxious. And when we conducted the rest of our research later in the year, we found that this was reflected around 60% feeling anxious about their lives and their country, particularly millennials, the older group who might be thinking of sort of buying houses and having kids, but mostly the world. So the scariest stat from this part of the study was that 8 in 10 young people really feel that the world is going to shit, and they're either a little bit or very concerned about it. Why though? I mean, it's not particularly hard to sum that one up. Not a lot of stats to this one. Look at the world we live in. We've seen things like Trump and Brexit. We've got our own revolving door of however many goddamn prime ministers we're up to at this point in the last 10 years. We've got an environmental crisis, a housing crisis, a plebiscite, lockout laws. The list just seemingly goes on, and it affects every demographic in our society. And the language that we're using as young people is really reflective of this. So it's sort of no coincidence that last year toxic was named the Oxford Dictionary word of 2018, something used pretty widely by young people, if you are one. And it's sort of very reflective of this like bad, unpleasant, harmful environment that we feel that we're living in. So it's pretty telling stuff. So what's the big concern? What are like the big ticket items that are keeping young people up at night? When we provide them with the list, what are the big three? So no surprises. The environment and climate change in general are right up the top, particularly for Gen Z. Nearly half are saying this is the #1 most concerning thing. World peace and the government are in there as well. So 3 pretty big nebulous topics. And the thing that they all have in common is that they're too complex to understand, and they're too big for like an individual contribution to really make a difference. In other words, they're global problems without like a unified global solution to get us there. This could help to explain why mental health is the #1 most important issue to young people. So when we flipped the question, we were expecting to see like job, money, education, all of this stuff ranking #1 in terms of importance, but mental health had jumped right up the top, and that's 35% higher than the last time we did this survey. So this is something that is becoming increasingly apparent as the years go on, particularly for Gen Z, who've grown up with more of a dialogue around discussing their mental health and having the language to sort of express their feelings about it. When we look at the list of the most important things, again, it's not job, it's not money, it's not personal satisfaction, mental health right up the top, climate change is up there as well. But it's basically all of these markers of wanting like a fairer and better society. So human rights, women's rights, education, LGBTIQ, racial equality, renewable energy, poverty, and healthcare. These are issues that are hugely important, and they're not easily solved. And they're the things that are the most important for most people in the Gen Z and millennial brackets. It also doesn't help when we're considering this stuff that we're completely oversaturated with news about them. So nearly half of millennials and Gen Z say that they're on social media more and more year on year, which means that the issues that they're worried about and which lack a tangible solution to them are being rammed down their throat in this 24/7 news cycle. And to be completely honest, it's doing their heads in. So what are they doing about it? If we're supposed to be this generation of, the most enabled and active, young people that are going to seize the day and save the world, what is actually happening? Not much. So when we asked people how they're engaging with activism and what issues that they're currently involved in, we found that almost half were not actually lifting a finger when it came to doing anything for the issues that they care about. So where climate change is right up the top in terms of concerning things, it's right down the bottom in terms of the types of issues that young people are actively engaging with. For those that are getting involved, we find that the type of activism that's preferred by young people is quite passive. So voting, obviously, right up the top. It's mandatory, it's very powerful in numbers, but you don't really get that tangible sense that your contribution has made a difference. It's the same with the next most popular ways of participating in activism. So donating to a cause, signing an online petition, posting and sharing things on socials, they're all really good, and they're all absolutely integral in our digital age of spreading the message. But again, we don't really get a tangible idea about what our contribution has done to advance the cause that we care about. And that's sort of key into what the problem is. And this is sort of something that we are calling the woke paradox. So there's this disconnect between what young people are finding important and what they're finding interesting. So this is a really interesting graph. When you look right up the top, you can see that saving the environment is the most important thing to young people. Number one, yards ahead of everything else. But when we flipped the question and asked them to rank in order of what was most interesting, it's pretty much all the way down the bottom. So when we're looking at a list of topics that resonate really well on our network for young people and they're things that they really care about, when we're looking at interesting versus important, the graph pretty much inverts. And that's a large part of the problem that, as publishers and creatives, we're trying to navigate. In other words, young people care, and they care a lot, but they're disengaged. They've been so oversaturated by these seemingly, solutionless problems that they're starting to disengage from them. So how are they coping? If everyone's anxious, and most people are anxious about the state of the world, what are they doing to soothe themselves if they're not actually getting out there and trying to save the day? No surprises, nearly 70%, I can personally relate, nearly 70% of people are choosing to do things like drink, smoke, take drugs, distract themselves, so Netflix and social media are right up there as well, and ignoring the problem, paraphrased as staying in bed, hiding, and just not dealing with the issue. And with all of that said, the certainty of data doesn't fully begin to explain the ambiguity of people. So these are all just, they're questions where we give people a bunch of options to rank what they care about and this sort of thing and get a bit of a sense of how they feel in the world. But luckily, we have the ability to connect with our readers and get them to write for us as much as they like, for as long as they like, through our survey tool that we run across our network. And so to sort of dig a little deeper into what's going on in the youth psyche, we decided to throw a question out there late at night and just see what people came up with when we asked, what is your biggest fear? And based on everything we knew from our survey, we were expecting, global warming, Trump, it's incredible how much traffic we get on Trump the world over, things like that, which seem to be dominating the global news sphere and the sphere within, our algorithm-driven social channels. But what we found, and if anyone was in the GoDaddy presentation earlier, this will be especially relevant, was that failure was the biggest thing. When we let people write to us as much as they liked, for as long as they liked, almost a third of the responses said that the thing they feared the most was failure, as well as being alone. Why, though? So what we're seeing happen in this very algorithm-dominated world is that there is a huge disconnect between what young people are seeing online and the realities of their day-to-day lives. So youth used to be about innocence, and anyone who sort of grew up in our age bracket can sort of, remember what it was like to live in a fairly analog world where everything was about discovery and there was a lot more independence. But now, to be young, the media says, is to be exceptional. So there's this conventional wisdom that we're all these side-hustling entrepreneurs who want to be millionaires and live in a warehouse apartment, and be crypto billionaire babies by the time they're 25. And we're constantly plagued by these torture tools that are 30 under 30 and, Kylie Jenner at age 20 becoming the world's youngest billionaire, and it's enough to drive you mad. Added to this is the fact that we live in a never-ending highlights reel of our friends' lives. So nobody posts their breakup, nobody posts, when they're having a fat day or a bad hair day or, not having the best time. All we ever see is our friends sunbaking on a beach somewhere, having the time of their lives. And as much as we know that this isn't how they live, it still has mental impacts on young people. This is summarized really well by Tristan Harris, who's a former design ethicist at Google, who says Facebook and Snapchat, in their design features, are persuading a teenager to wake up and see photo after photo after photo of their friends having fun without them, even if it makes them feel worse. So we're kind of addicted to this process of scrolling, and feeling worse about it as we go along. And as marketers and advertisers and publishers and creators, we're absolutely contributing to this problem. So Vice has an agency arm where we work with partners, and we did a review of all the briefs we received in 2017. And 78% of them wanted us to profile innovators, entrepreneurs, and creators making lasting change in the world. And they have to be millionaires, and they have to be 16, and they have to be all these other things, right? So we're trying to find people like Nick Merkovic, who's 23. He's a co-founder of High Smile. He's got a combined wealth of about 46 mil. He's the youngest person ever on the Australian Financial Review's Rich List, and he owes his very successful marketing strategy to a campaign involving Kendall and Kylie Jenner, so just, his mates from down the road. Meanwhile, here's me at 23. I was sitting on the floor of the RMIT edit suites at about 2 in the morning, submitting my media portfolio, subsisting pretty much solely off Red Bull at that point. So pretty similar to Nick right there. There's also Molly Steer. She is amazing. She's 10. She's an activist. And she successfully campaigned the Cairns City Council to ban plastic straws recently. Here's a picture of her doing a TED Talk. So that's a 10-year-old doing a TED Talk. I'm 29, and this is my first Pause Fest. So yeah. I will catch up to her one day, I'm sure of it. So what were you doing when you were 10? Probably not doing a TED Talk, or a Pause Fest for that matter. So there you go. So what we're seeing a lot of marketers and creatives and publishers do is that we're looking at young people who are the absolute exception, and we're making them the rule. And the result is that it's making young people really feel like shit about themselves. This could help to explain why imposter syndrome is such a thing. So in the last few years, searches for imposter syndrome have been up 376%, according to Google Trends. And if you're not familiar with imposter syndrome, it's basically something that makes you feel like you're not good enough, and that you're in this position, but you don't fully deserve to be there. We've covered this a lot on our vertical ID, which talks to a lot of mental health issues for young people. And there's a quote from Nisa here that really sums up what imposter syndrome is. She says, "During my first year at uni, I began meeting people who were more traveled, more well-read, and more eloquent than I was. That type of atmosphere stifles feelings of comfort and belonging. I felt like an outsider." And this is something that we're seeing is becoming increasingly more prevalent for young people today. When we asked people who weren't using social media, so who had sort of split off from this algorithm-driven world, why that was, like why they'd made the break, all the answers were pretty unanimous. They said, "I feel like my life isn't interesting enough. I don't want to look like a boasty pants. I don't think anyone really cares what I have to say. I feel like no one will care what I post unless it's exciting or I'm backpacking. And every time I go online, I feel anxious and I feel like a failure." And this was when we really joined the dots between this failure thing and a life lived online. It was just, it's just so abundantly clear that this is what's going on. So we know that people are on social media more than ever before, but what we're thinking is that they're too anxious to participate unless they have something exceptional to say. So feeding into that idea that we only show a highlights reel of our own lives. So how do we actually define success as young people? What's actually the most important? It's actually pretty simple. So where you'd think it would be to make a lot of money or land a dream job or get personal recognition or any of those things, what we actually found was right up the top was being able to do all the things in life that are important to me, having strong relationships with friends and family, and making a strong change on the community, company, or the world that I inhabit. And we find that content that embraces the ordinary as a publisher is really what gets the clicks. So I'm about to show you a little clip of a series or an episode called Rage in the Cage from our series Australiana that looks outside of the major cities about the lives of people who are sort of living on the suburban fringe. And so this is the burnout competition that happens in Bensdale. Ready?
That's the fire brigade. Oh, shit. You guys must have been called. We just got the car out of the shop and just given a bit of a test run because there's a fair bit of smoke. We've got to do one more if you guys want to watch. Safety first.
That is such an awesome documentary. Give it a look when you get home. It's like the best. But there's also an agony aunt, sort of Dolly Doctor style series called In Bloom, where we did a call out among young people for questions that they felt they needed answered about their mental health, about sexual health, whatever it might be. And we got real people from across the globe to sort of give their 2 cents and to answer these questions. It was all shot on an iPhone, and it turned out really well.
How do you let go of a toxic friend?
I think the best thing to do when you have a toxic friend is to confront them.
Snip, 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 cut that off. Cut that at the core.
There's certain people that you know they're your close friend, they're good for you, and then there are some people that you just need to keep at arm's length. So just distance yourself and just politely maybe make excuses. You're busy, sorry. Most people will start to get the hint if they've got a little bit of pride, you know.
You need closure from having toxic friendships, and I do think that you have a due diligence to educate the person who is spreading their toxicity into your life. It can be a simple conversation, and I do think you just need to take control and be like, hey, love you, love your work. I'm at a position where I'm just not gelling with you like I thought I was.
I have been in scenarios where people have made me feel less or made me feel anxious, but then after the fact have said, no, I'm doing this because I love you.
I'm not someone that believes in burning bridges. I don't think you should ever just cut people off.
To be honest, I used to be a ghoster, like I was heavy on that ghosting thing, but what do we know about ghosts? They haunt you.
I just realized that if you truly were my friend and you truly loved me, you would want me to be happy and you wouldn't want me to be feeling anxious all the time.
Every person that I've attempted to ghost in my life either hasn't gotten the memo, so continues to orbit around me, or refuses to accept the memo. You do need that clarity. You do need to say, this is how I feel. This is my best case scenario. Please adhere.
So essentially what we're saying is it's about the simple things in life. So where social media and particularly the algorithms that we live in day to day, 24/7, are preaching this cult of sort of excellence and exceptionism, the reality is that for most young people, life is pretty ordinary. And to achieve cut-through to this group, it's about sort of embracing that and coming up with stories that are going to speak to them in a way that they understand and appreciate. So what can we learn from this? Essentially, don't add to the problem, become part of the solution. So be pro-ordinary and stop this cult of exceptionalism, normalize self-doubt and embrace failure and anxiety. They're obviously really huge parts of young people's lives, and help them recognize and make sense and make a difference in the world. And I'm going to draw a breath and hand over to Hannah to talk through the second trend that we uncovered in our research.
Thank you. So in the first section, we spoke about how algorithms impact our state of mind. Now we're going to look at how algorithms are impacting our tastes, opinions, and beliefs. So young people are very much in their formative years. They're busy trying to work out who they are and where they belong in the world. And a big part of that is being unique. So 1 in 2 of them say that they like to be original and stand out, which could be why we're seeing them not wanting to be boxed in. So to them, labels and stereotypes are very restrictive and old-fashioned. You know, we've seen this shift from a group identity where the group shares similar tastes, opinions, and values like punks and skaters and emos, to more of a network identity, which is more fluid, and individuals sit at the center of a broader and more loosely connected network. They're very much challenging traditional norms, so from gender norms in skate culture to toxic masculinity and racial stereotypes, they're really redefining what it means to be young today. But despite this desire to be unique and reject stereotypes, and the fact that there's meant to be more choice than ever before, the things that young people like, do, and think are starting to look surprisingly similar. We believe that culture is shifting towards the middle. So this is really evident in music tastes. So back in 2015, when we asked young people what they were listening to, the results were really quite varied. It was a mix of EDM, rock, indie, and hip-hop. However, in 2018, we saw pretty much hip-hop dominate, followed by pop, R&B, and top 40, which, to be honest, arguably at the moment are more or less the same thing. Don't believe us? Just look to Billboard's most popular artists of 2018, majority of which are rappers. and then more locally to FOMO, which is one of Australia's best and last standing music festivals. Back in 2016, the lineup was a real mix of genres. In 2019, it was dominated by rap. And young people are not just listening to the same music, they're also dressing the same. So when we asked them what sort of clothes they're buying, they predominantly said sportswear, closely followed by streetwear. Again, two very similar styles. And this is summed up really nicely by David Fisher, who's the founder of streetwear site High Snobiety. He says, what was once an underground fashion scene for skaters is now saturated by teenage lads with eye-watering amounts of disposable cash. And this sentiment is continued into beauty as well, with everyone wanting to look natural, basic, and classic. We believe that we're in this moment of consensus. So this phenomenon is best summed up by author and anthropologist Grant McCracken in his book Chief Culture Officer. He actually says that, but for all this new variety, there are still moments when a magical consensus will emerge. We decide that for all our differences, we share a way of seeing the world and defining ourselves. A characteristic style of clothing, language, music, art, and prose springs up. Why though? Great question. So you need look no further than the very different worlds that these generations have grown up in. So millennials grew up pre-internet with tangible products of culture like CDs, DVDs, and magazines like Vice. They spent their weekends at Westfield, they hung out with their friends at sleepovers and on three-way phone calls. They paid with things in cash and their lives were largely analog. Gen Z, on the other hand, have been online since birth. So they've grown up with programmatic recommendations like Spotify and Netflix. They shop online, they hang out with their friends on social media, they pay with things in Afterpay, and their lives are largely digital. And these very different experiences are quite definitive in the way that they seek out the new or next big trends. Millennials very much pride themselves on being early adopters. As a generation that grew up flicking through magazines for style advice and trawling Hype Machine for new music, they very much pride themselves on being the first to know and the first to share, and they're super proactive in being out there and looking for the new and next big trends. Gen Z, on the other hand, are much more happy for you to do the sifting for them. So if we're saying that millennials are the cool hunters, what does that make Gen Z? Unfortunately, we're calling them slaves to the feed. So when we ask young people where they get their news from, Gen Z overwhelmingly said social media, a site that's largely driven by algorithms. And it's not just their news that's being served to them by algorithms. So it's their music, the clothes that they're wearing, what they're watching, where they're traveling, who they're dating, who they're connecting with on social media. And we believe that this is impacting their view of the world. As a result, their view of the world has become heavily curated and increasingly homogenized. But I hear you ask, if it's also unique, shouldn't personalization make our tastes more diverse? Well, no, not necessarily. A great example of this is Instagram account InstaRepeat, which basically curates lookalike images from across Instagram and proves that we're more or less all living the same lives.
It's so good.
Its founder sums it up really nicely. She says, what gets likes gets created, and viewers will like what is familiar. So more of the same is created. New art and boundary-pushing imagery isn't comfortable and isn't as easily digestible on a quick scroll by. And thus, it doesn't seem to be created as much. It's like the content is part of a self-feeding loop. So, what about the revival of the 90s brand logo? Staff writer for the Fashion Law asked a really great question here. She asked, is it a coincidence, for instance, that a handful of brands went overboard with the branding this season? Well, of course not. We visualize the forces at play in this, I guess, social media loop. Let's say it went a little something like this. So a skater is wearing a vintage Tommy Hilfiger hoodie. He posts it to Instagram. His friend buys a similar hoodie. They post it to Instagram. Trend forecasting sites like WGSN notice and they pick up on this trend. They add it to their annual trend report, which gets distributed to all fashion labels, including high fashion. Gucci launches a streetwear line, and then Gen Z saves up to buy the tee and posts it all over Instagram. And so the loop continues. Another great example more recently was the festival shirt. I'm not sure if any of you guys saw this in your feed. It was quite fun. It basically resulted in hundreds of festival bros wearing the same shirt at music festivals across summer. And we think the algorithms had a little something to do with it. So again, we're going to assume, but let's say it went a little something like this. A popular musician wears a printed shirt whilst playing at a festival. He posts some pics, maybe his fans post some pics, then punters go out, they buy a similar shirt, they then post some pics to Instagram. Cotton On uses search term technology to pick up on the trend. They create a replica shirt, which is called festival shirt. Young festival goers go onto Google to find said festival shirt and all end up buying the same thing. Pics get posted to Instagram. In fact, shitloads of them do. Brenton Smith, I love his comment. He sums it up really nicely in the comment section. He says, the irony of some people wanting to be alternative, but ending up the same anyway. The truth is that we want to be unique, but we're all being influenced by the same things and directed on the same path to purchase. And what about the platforms that proclaim to be catering to our personal tastes? Well, they're not really doing so at all. This is a screenshot of Spotify on the day that Drake's album, his latest album, Scorpion, was released. Pitchfork called them out for putting his face on every single playlist on the platform, including those that his songs didn't actually appear on. Back in TV world, I'm pretty sure you call this approach just like pray and spray. And then, again, Stranger Things, great example. How many of you were recommended to watch this at one point or another? So many lies in the room. I feel
Literally
like everyone should have their hand up. So depending on what sort of content you typically watch, perhaps if you're into horror, you will serve the tile at the bottom left-hand corner, or if you were more of a rom-com fan, you will serve the one in the bottom middle. So what you can see here is Netflix not personalizing the product, but simply personalizing the marketing. So what we're saying is the feed is destroying our individual personal tastes, and it's kind of sad. Kyle Shaker, who's a writer for Vox, sums this up perfectly in his article, Style is an Algorithm. He says that we don't calculate or measure if something is tasteful to us, we simply feel it. Displacing the judgment of taste partly to algorithms robs us of some of that humanity. Okay, so what can we actually learn from this? First up, avoid perpetuating norms and stereotypes. Young people want to feel unique, but they don't want to feel like outsiders. So find ways that you can help them feel unique, but still be part of the crowd. A really just great example of this is limited edition labels. They allow people to be part of a wider trend, but carve out their own kind of unique space within that. And remember that, like, to use data to inform what you do, not dictate. Like, we're all pretty much looking at the same trend reports and the same sets of data. Find a way to differentiate and don't rely on data to tell you exactly what it is that you need to do. And then finally, where to from here? Well, we don't have the answers. I'm sorry. We're not futurists. We don't know what's happening next. But we hope that by shedding some light on what's happening now, we can help you play a relevant role in young people's lives today to ensure that you're still around tomorrow. Stay relevant.